Hi, I'm MacKenzie Fegan, and this is 112BK. Coming up, tales of retail, shuttered shops, fines on signs, and now a bag ban. A New York Times reporter is here to sum it up.
All of these things that we take, that we see advertised to us as conveniences, as advantages, as efficiencies, they come at a cost, and the cost is usually our neighbors and our friends in terms of jobs and in terms of businesses.
And then the 10-year challenge, Brooklyn edition.
Honestly, not all these changes are great. You know, I miss Glasslands, and I imagine you miss Southpaw, but and I don't like paying what I pay in rent anymore. But overall, I'm really happy that I'm still in Brooklyn 10 years later.
Walk into your neighborhood bodega, the one with classic #1 Deli Express written on the shop sign, and walk out with a 6-pack of Tecate and a pint of Haagen-Dazs in a plastic bag. Now imagine there's no plastic bag. Imagine there's no sign. What if I told you there's not even a bodega? New York retail is facing an existential crisis, and here to talk with us about the challenges facing the city's stores, we're joined by Azi Paybarah, who writes the New York Today column for the New York Times. Welcome back to 112BK.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote an article recently called "Can Anyone Solve the Vacant Storefront Problem?" What is the vacant storefront problem, and can anyone solve it?
That is a great question. The vacant storefront problem is, like it sounds, you walk down the street, there used to be a store, and now there's not. What is left is a vacant storefront. It's sort of like the shell of a cicada that you used to see on sides of trees when we still had trees. Or it's sort of like a haunted house.
Sure.
It's just standing there, it's empty, and you look inside, and there's like remnants of what used to be there.
The hollow container that used to house the soul of a store.
Exactly. Or my favorite foods, or your favorite books.
Right.
And they stand there, and you get this reminder of the past, and that there's not something new moving in. Makes it stand out particularly noticeable. And it's not just one neighborhood, it's not just one street, it's not just one borough. This is happening across the city, it's happening across the country.
And why is that?
Online retail has sort of moved in, and they haven't just moved in to the internet, they've moved into our pockets by being on our cell phones.
And to Long Island City.
And to Long Island City.
Right.
We see you at Amazon and your helipad. But with everyone being able to access or have the expectation of accessing more of what they want and more of what they need on their phones, there is less of an appetite for people to walk down multiple streets or even one street to get things that they want. So if you start your day working from home, where you don't have to go into a particular office, businesses lose the foot traffic that they used to rely on.
That's one of the issues that is contributing to these vacant storefronts. What else we got?
Rising rents. Surprise, surprise, New York City is expensive. Even more surprising, it keeps getting more expensive. So if businesses are being squeezed for customers, but then their landlords are saying, we have other people that can pay more, then there's an obvious price tension that happens there. You add to it, according to some critics, more regulation about how much people are paid in wages, time off, and things of that nature. Employing humans is a complicated process. And the more that you have to deal with, the harder it becomes and the less room for mistakes you have when you're running that kind of business. So those are two factors happening on the economic level.
But why then don't we just see like a Walgreens or another national chain in all of these vacant storefronts? Like if landlords are saying, well, I could get a big business to come in, why are they still sitting empty?
It's a great question. Sometimes landlords are able to write off of their own, I believe, taxes, the expense of leaving a storefront vacant. When you talk to people who are dealing with this issue, they say that landlords have an incentive to sort of keep a storefront vacant, write it off, rather than sign a 10-year lease at a lower rent, because that locks in that discount that a landlord has to sort of incur. One of the reasons why you don't see as many vacant storefronts potentially is that there are efforts to keep sort of beloved neighborhood places like the bookstore on the Upper West Side, interestingly enough called the West Sider, used and rare books. They had a GoFundMe campaign that helped them when they were on the precipice of going out of business.
So businesses are relying on the charity and goodwill of their patrons in order to keep them in business.
Yes, and that happened also in Midtown with the Drama Bookshop when Lin-Manuel Miranda, who we all know from Hamilton, stepped in and said, I and some other partners from the show will come in and save this bookstore from closing. The city is helping them, is helping that business relocate nearby. But there you have a few wealthy people who are able and have an interest in saving a particular bookstore.
This doesn't seem sustainable, the patronage system for small businesses.
That is exactly why all of those feel-good stories are actually kind of ominous. That if you are in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of people who are able to organize and donate money in this way, and if you are not a business that has a sentimental place in the hearts of a few very well-to-do people, your days may be numbered. You could feel that way.
So what are some other solutions? Like I know San Francisco has a legacy business registry where if you've been around for a certain number of years, you can get on the registry and there are certain protections and also subsidies that you are that you qualify for.
Right, which some people will say even that is somewhat of a problem because you're now asking the taxpayer to sort of subsidize a business that may not be able to sort of sustain on their own. And if they're not sustaining on their own, maybe you should sort of let the marketplace do what the marketplace does. But when you ask about who can solve this, whenever people have problems, they often go to a select group of people, lawmakers. They hear from constituents. They're up for election all the time, and for better or for worse, if a problem's in their wheelhouse, they often get asked to sort of deal with what's happening in the places around them. The state Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's mansion are all controlled by Democrats now after the most recent elections. So therefore, a unified party or a state government in a unified party control now has an opportunity to sort of address this in a real muscular way.
And what is some of this potential legislation? There's business rent control. What else?
The mayor has sort of tried to float a couple of different ideas. What they all sort of come down to is protecting existing businesses and preventing landlords from raising rents almost the way that you would have those protections for residential tenants with rent control, rent stabilization, and things of that nature. So you have all of these sort of like forces at play, and it's not clear what specifically is going to emerge as like the sole solution or the magic bullet. It's going to require customers to change their behavior. It's going to require people to deal with less efficiency. If you want your neighborhood store and you don't want it to be run by algorithms and drones and robots, and if you want people to be employed in there, you're going to have to spend more time going into those stores, spending money. All of these things that we take, that we see advertised to us as conveniences, as advantages, as efficiencies, they come at a cost, and the cost is usually our neighbors and our friends in terms of jobs and in terms of businesses.
So that might be a pretty tall order
to
get people to abandon online shopping. But I guess I'm curious, so much of having robust retail in a neighborhood is about forming community and interacting with your neighbors and having somebody who knows your name at the local store.
Yeah.
And if all of these places disappear and the future of real world retail is looking bleak, what would you like to see maybe replace some of these ground floor storefronts?
I think when we talk about space, the physical makeup of the city, and what we want as people, we are starting to have to reimagine what we are expecting. There used to be a time where you didn't have to think about it. Look at the model of a library. It's owned by the city. It operates very much like a public space, and it's a place where people can access so many resources. It's not transactional in the way that we think of most retail.
It's downright communist.
It is in a way, but they have free Wi-Fi. In some places, you don't even have to use a PIN to log on. Now, what is happening with all these retail spaces? You sort of wonder, well, maybe they have to be reimagined in a way where somebody owns it, so someone takes responsibility for its upkeep, its maintenance, but that the people who are invited in are not necessarily presented with the barrier of a financial transaction in order to stay. You see a little bit of that with public atriums that sort of pop up in between buildings in Manhattan. There's a lot of people who are sort of working on this, but you have to start thinking outside the box, other than direct transactions.
Right, reimagining the ways in which we use space in the city.
It's 2019. Let's think different.
That's right. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about a rather bizarre news piece, which has to do with signs and awnings.
Yes.
Can you tell us what happened?
There was a spike in the number of complaints that were being made to city officials, and the complaints were sort of curious. Not many people know this, but there are rules and regulations about what type of information you have on your sign. Technically speaking, I believe you are required to have your business name or the name you do business under, your address, and I believe that's it. Anything else technically falls outside of the lane of what you're allowed to have.
And
so
there's also size restrictions, right? Like anything above a certain square footage.
And font size and things like that. Yes, they're as much fun as you can take out of sign awnings. Someone has thought of it and basically put it into a city rule. And I guess the idea was to say people need a basic understanding of what is a business when it opens up. And now that there were rules set in place, and then there's the way people behave, and they're not always the same.
Sure, and this obscure piece of code is like largely ignored, right?
It is largely ignored. Every couple of years, if you've been around the city long enough, you'll hear vague stories about like, oh, there was a random spike in complaints that were happening. And it somehow doesn't feel organic. It feels like it's orchestrated. It feels like it's concentrated in a particular area at a particular time. There is speculation from a Brooklyn City Council member and others that maybe this was connected to a person who makes signs or a city official getting money from someone who makes signs. Right? Like you get these like conspiracies about what's happening.
Right. It's as if somebody who sells tires goes around and slashes the tires of his neighbors and is like, "Oh, it's too bad, but if you need new tires,
I'm your guy."
I'm your guy.
Exactly.
There was also concern that maybe there was some racial targeting going on because a lot of these complaints were in Sunset Park and people who had signs in languages other than English were perhaps being targeted.
Yes, there has always been this tension in New York City, as long as I can remember, in certain areas where people say that a sign that does not have any English or enough English somehow is discriminatory and unfair and even unsafe. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying that is what has been the argument for wanting to change it. One person who has tried to change it in years past was a councilman who later became a state senator, Tony Avella, out in Queens. And one of the arguments he had made was that if you're a fireman rushing in, if you don't see the smoke, but you know sort of what the address is, you need to know what is on the other side of the door. And if you don't have a sign that's in English, how are we going to know, right?
If you have a dangerous peanut allergy, you might mistakenly walk into a peanut shop, not realizing.
Or if there's a fire and it's a paper store rather than an animal shelter, you would sort of want to know what are the contours there. And that argument, people have criticized it and said, look, you know, it's sort of xenophobic. If you have the basic information, you know, in terms of physical location, that's good. And people have used the argument of, I speak English, that sign's not in English. And it seems to mirror debates that people have in other parts of the country about whether or not English should be the official language and things of that nature. And it is hard to dismiss the accusation of xenophobia when you see the complaints targeted in certain neighborhoods and not in others for very similar looking awnings and signs. So hopefully the city figures out what's going on. But this is just one more headache for a person who is rolling up the gates on their business, wanting to stay, you know, doing what they're doing. And this is just like another weird random thing that seems to happen in New York City every couple of years.
And the fines for the signs are not small. It's like a minimum $6,000 per sign. So this is a burden on a lot of small business owners who, as we've heard, are already under significant pressure.
Imagine how many slices of pizza you have to sell to pay off that fine.
Well, it depends on what neighborhood you're selling pizza. Only a couple and a few.
Fair point.
Let's get to the really sexy stuff, which is plastic bag ban. Talk
Yes.
to us about what legislation is going to be coming through and how it's going to impact people.
Somehow, for some reason, California, Boston,
Hawaii.
Hawaii, and a number of other places, France, Kenya, like other places have sort of dealt with the idea of getting rid of single-use plastic bags and banning them. Other places have put a fine or a tax in order to discourage the use of those plastic bags. And for some reason, New York City got blocked when they tried to do a 5-cent bag surcharge by Andrew. They got blocked by Andrew Cuomo, and now he is saying that he would like a statewide ban on plastic bags, and it becomes slightly challenging when you think of what that ban would do. If you're not using plastic bags, you might use paper bags.
Right. And is that worse? Is that better?
It is a challenge because it is more expensive for businesses to procure them and stock them. They're actually heavier to sort of transport.
But in terms of like environmental impact?
They degrade and they're recyclable, but they do put more pressure on trees, on having to make them. So imagine if you have a balloon, and if you squeeze one into the balloon to make it smaller, that all that extra air might pop out somewhere else. If you are diminishing the need or the demand for plastic bags, you might increase the need for paper bags. And as we know, with rainforests all over the world, they are shrinking because more people are cutting down trees and whatnot. Exempt from a plastic bag ban are things like the bag that your newspaper comes in. If you still get a newspaper delivered to your home, it's in a plastic bag, safe. If you are in the produce aisle of your supermarket and you want to take your cilantro but not have it mixed with your grapes, you put them in 2 plastic bags, fine. If you eat meat and you have the butcher slice up chicken, duck, ground beef, and he puts it in a bag, safe. The bags that are not going to be allowed to be used are the bags that you would get from the cashier when you put all of those in bags to carry home.
Right.
In New York City, the conversation is, oh my God, what are people going to do? That's outrageous. But if you look outside of New York City, it's done.
Well, it's a little absurd. You know, like San Francisco passed this ages ago, and also like in certain sectors of Brooklyn, carrying your WNYC or your New Yorker tote is just
mandatory.
Sort of done.
Right. You know, you move into your apartment.
But I think some of the criticism is that this might have it might impact low-income communities disproportionately.
Yes. So that is an argument that is used frequently whenever there is change that is made.
Right. And if we do ban plastic bags, it's not as if there won't be paper bags, other options.
There are paper bags. There are backpacks.
Sure.
And the city does have a program to give free reusable bags to people. It is not difficult. I'm not saying it's the easiest thing in the world to do, but there are ways to do this. And if you are motivated, if you're organized, and if you want to do it, there is a way. It's a debate, it's a conversation, it's an equation, and I just wish people sort of connected those two when they were discussing plastic bags.
Azi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.